And we look on item 1, apologies for absence. Anybody aware?
Apologies, she's from Councillor Powell.
Thank you. Nobody else that anybody knows of before we move on? Right, if we move on then to item 2, declaration of interest. Members are reminded the personal responsibility to declare both orally and in writing any personal or prejudicial interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act 2000, the Fire and Rescue Authority standing orders and the Members' Code of Conduct. Has anybody got anything they would like to declare? Roll quiet. Anything? I've only got anything again, which is on page 23. All right, just to make sure nobody's got anything right.
Councillor Proctor just joined the meeting.
Right. Well, right, if we move on to item 3 then, chairperson's announcements. I've got none at the moment. So move on to item 4 then. Receive the minutes to the Finance, Audit and Performance Management Committee held on Monday, 11th of April 2022. So I don't know, everybody's got the minutes. You may not have been on that meeting if you're a new member.
No, it'll only be yourself, Chair. Who was present at the meeting.
I'm quite happy to move them as long as members can note.
Well, I'm to the best of my ability, yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right. We move on to. Has anybody got any questions on that before I move on? Even though we may not have been on it. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Reports for decision now. We move on to item 5. Revenue outturn report 2021 to 2022. That starts on page 9. And I think, Lisa, that's yours.
Hello.
Am I supposed to be in here?
Yeah.
I've been in room 16.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, that's no problem. I didn't want you thinking I was being like shy.
Yeah, no, I seen you and I thought, oh, I should know.
Morning all.
Morning.
Start the reports decision. Right?
Yeah.
Before we start, is there anything you want to declare of any interest?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right, no, that's fine.
All right, good morning all.
Well,
So this first report is the revenue outturn report. It's a standard annual report that members receive after the end of the financial year. So this report summarises the revenue budget outturn position. So outturn for new members means the final spending position, and that's for the year ending the 31st March 2022. So this report summarises how we've arrived at the underspend for the year, 3.8 million, which is a 1.8 million pound increase since previous reporting in March. So just for new members' awareness, the way we do this reporting, instead of rehashing what we've reported in previous FAPM dates, we just report on the difference between last report and this report. Yeah. So overall, we've got a 1.4 million pound underspend on employee costs. We've got a £1 million underspend on non-employee areas, and that's a number of areas there, from premises through to transport, supplies and services. And then we had £1.4 million worth of additional income since budget setting. So that's just short of 5% of the total budget. So this report presents information with a narrative, a summary narrative there that tells you how we've arrived at all those differences since previous reporting. And it does this with the help of 5 appendices. So you've got Appendix 1, which is a budget overview. So it's the structure of the budget for the year, the actual spend and the outturn position. Appendix 2 charts then the projected outturns since the year started, and it gives a narrative as to what the differences are and the variances. Appendix number 3 is an important appendix. It gives members a snapshot of what a reserve position is, what the movement at year end in our reserves are. And 4 and 5 they give information on the grant funding that this organisation receives. So in summary, the 1.8 million change since previous reporting, which is March. It's two main areas are contributing to that. So 617,000 of additional employee costs that we thought we were going to spend that we didn't spend, and £600,000 worth of additional income. And that's the majority of the change since previous reporting to members. So if we go through the report itself, it provides more detail of what the underspends are, from employee costs right the way through to income. It also makes note of the audit process, the year-end process that is now complete. And just to confirm, there are no changes to the report as a result of the audit process that we've undertaken. So the £3.8 million stays. The recommendation is that the outturn position and consequent transfer to usable reserves of the revenue surplus is received and noted. To take any questions?
Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask Lisa? I've probably got a few, Lisa.
All right.
The first of all is, with a lot of the slippage, it's been mitigated circumstances to explain the new members because of, procurement, timelines and overspills of trying to get vehicles, or what I'm trying to do is just make you aware that that's the reason the slippage is happening, because of that type of thing.
Yeah.
We'll cover some of that off on the capital report.
Yeah, it does,
some
yeah.
of the mentions, some of the ones you mentioned there, Chair, are the capital items. But similarly, there are things within the revenue budget that inevitably slip. Probably worth mentioning to members. One of the things we've been very uncertain about at the moment, given the current climate in the economy, is pay. And what we knew was we'd overplayed last year's pay awards, and in compensating for that, we've kind of deliberately underpaid this year's pay awards, and when we set the budget for the current year. Now, obviously, you'll know from the press that we're looking at pay awards now approaching 4 or 5% probably as a minimum. And we haven't had any clarification yet on what fire service pay awards are going to look like. But it's likely that when those pay awards come through, we will have to commit a substantial amount of this underspend to actually meeting the cost of those pay awards in the current year. So that money will be recycled into the current year's budget. So just to make that point to members that it's important to recognise, whilst this looks like a substantial chunk of money becoming available, it will actually need to be committed in the current financial year. And then obviously we'll have to take another look at pay going forward in the next financial year as we set next year's budget. So there is a bit of volatility there that we're aware of and are managing.
Yeah, I think the Chair's query was really in relation to the capital charges, obviously the knock-on implication, capital charges, in that area, directly linked to the slippage on the capital programme, which will be covered off in capital report.
The only other question I had on page 10, it seems to be a lot of leavers of the service, total leavers and joiners in April 2021 and around 2022. Is there any specific reason, or is it just?
Obviously, it's one of the issues that we're looking at across the board, but predominantly around the on-call contracts. There's a project team being set up and looking at this. This is an issue that we've faced for a number of years now. Is the retention of the on-call firefighters. Included in that leavers figure, there are a number of those leavers who have actually transferred into the whole-time system, so that they've become successful in becoming whole-time firefighters. So they become leavers in that sense. But then once they're in the whole-time system, some of them do maintain their on-call commitment as well. So they do come back and stay as on-call firefighters. But it's obviously around that period when they're doing the initial 13-week training course, they drop out of the system. But then fortunately, a lot of them do maintain that commitment. But yeah, I think it's like everything. All organisations are facing the turnover of staff in the last few years. But it is a particular area of concern for us, and it's something that we are focusing on and trying to address. That retention of on-call firefighters in the future.
Members happy with that, or any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I do have a question. Of the 88 RDS leavers, only 5 have retired. And I think there was 22 people on the last course that we done, so that still leaves a gap of 50.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're being fair to the service by recruiting whole-time firefighters from the on-call system. If we're losing that many people, we can't take more out to prop up the whole-time staff. But even with the whole-time staff, it says here there's 60 people left. And in the statement of accounts, which is, I think, Appendix 3, only 38 of them have retired. So 22 have just finished because they're going for alternative employment. So we have got a problem on retention on ordinary firefighters as well as the on-call firefighters. So I didn't know if you got anything in line to address that.
It does. It's something that is being looked at. There is a project team set up specifically looking at this. It's something that the HR and people services are constantly looking at. The recruitment team there, and yeah, as an executive leadership team, we recognise the risk, and it is something we are closely monitoring and trying to address.
Because traditionally, people have they've worked till they've retired, but it's changing now.
It is. The culture is changing completely right across the workforces, and some of those figures again will be people transferring to other services, so not necessarily leaving the fire sector, but there is a higher proportion leaving the service earlier than retirement than it used to be.
Martin, you want to?
Yeah, I was going to just add to that. Presumably there are exit interviews as well, so we have an understanding and appreciation of where people are going to, and so we can perhaps identify the sort of occupations, and which was quite useful for setting on where we're going.
Yeah, we do have an exit interview procedure or process in place. Unfortunately, it's a voluntary system, so not everyone takes up the option to have an exit interview. A lot do, but not everyone does. So we don't always capture that data. But again, that's another area we've recognised we need to improve on, and trying to make it more of a mandatory process so that everyone has to have an exit interview, so we can capture some of the good quality data that we need, not just on where they go into, but about their experiences in the service, while they were here, good and bad.
Yes.
Can I just? I've already been called in to one of our stations over the retention pay. I've had a quick meeting with Gary this morning over it, and I'm glad that it is being looked at, because you can't keep losing good people like this. This is the trouble when they can only do Tesco's.
Yeah.
So it is.
Well, as long as you've had a discussion, and it's all.
I have. I have.
But
They'll be ongoing.
Yeah. Anybody else would like to ask anything before we move on? Anybody on the screen? No? Yeah.
Sorry, I did have one more question, and it's on page 22 with the property. I think it's 2.44.
That's the next one.
I do apologise.
Forward planning, but not that forward.
Yeah.
We've all done it, don't worry.
Yeah, no worries.
Right, if everybody's happy, then the recommendations that the outturn position and consequent transfer to usable reserves of the revenue surplus is received and noted. Does somebody would like to propose it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, everybody in agreement?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Right then, if you move on to the next item then.
So this is the capital outturn report. So again, a standard annual report that comes to members after the close of the financial year. So it's the same format as the revenue outturn. It gives a summary overview of how we've arrived at the £2.4 million capital investment at the end of the year. And it just reports on the differences between the report that was presented to members in March and the current picture as it is. Capital report is slightly different, as members have identified, from revenue. It's got a longer term sort of facing view of things. Our capital projects are take longer to come to fruition than revenue. That's a timeline of more than 12 months. Since previous reporting, the outturn, which is the final spend, has reduced by 1.5 million, and that is in relation to all the things that the chair's identified in terms of supply chain issues, waiting for electric vehicles, in regards to property, waiting for offers to be accepted. So some of those things have just been out of our control in this last year. So altogether, we had £8.3 million budget between the budget set for the year and the slippage from last year into this year. The actual outturn was 2.4%. And the slippage into 22-23 is 6.4 million. And that is for schemes that have started and then we have to finish it in the new year. As I said, the time horizon for capital schemes is a lot longer than revenue. So the capital investment figure is reduced from 3.8 to 2.5, and this relates mostly to vehicles since previous reporting. So there's £1 million in the vehicle replacement programme. It's 100,000 reduction in ICT works, just short of 300,000 in the property schemes and 54 in equipment. So that adds up to between last and this report. All this is summarised in Appendix 1. So that gives an overview of the budget set for the year and the different schemes that we've had in place. Members will also notice at the bottom there's a funding analysis. So you will be aware that we received no funding for our capital investment, and that any capital investment that we do make, we do it through borrowing, to a lesser degree than grant works that we're fortunate to have in during the year. And at the bottom there, it says what that breakdown is. So there's a small revenue contribution from the revenue budget also. So it just sets out for members how we funded that £2.4 million investment. Obviously, the financing or the cost of financing, so interest, statutory charges, all those things, they come out of the revenue budget. So that comes out of the capital financing budget and the revenue budget. So these two budgets are inextricably linked. Yeah, so if we spend more, of course, we're going to borrow more to invest more. Interest charges, statutory payments are more than in the revenue budget. So that is the final position. Appendix 2 gives members sight of the capital grants that we received in the year for 2 projects that are currently being undertaken. Some electric vehicle chargers that we've invested in the year. That's set to continue 2022-23. We've just had confirmation from Welsh Government that they're going to allow us to invest in and widespread our infrastructure, which is really good news for us. And then you've got the 308,000 there for the USAR property development, and that relates to the USAR or National Resilience housing sited at Whitchurch Station. So it's there to look after our USAR and National Resilience assets. And that's it really, unless there's any questions.
Good.
I got 2 questions now,
Yeah,
not just
you
one,
on.
sorry. Slippage,
Yes.
for me to understand, just means carried forward, is it?
Yeah, it does. So
Right.
we've committed it for the
Yeah.
project. So the project has got a whole life budget.
Yeah.
So in the year then, if we don't spend it all because of, like, for a building project, if there's been torrential rain,
Yeah.
or there's been delayed works due to, I mean, you don't know what's underneath the ground on
Yeah.
groundworks
Yeah.
until you put a shovel in. If there's been delays there, we would not write the budget off, which is what we do with revenue at the
Yeah.
end of the year. It doesn't stay there, it doesn't for stationary, it just gets, we start anew. With capital, it's different, we slip it forward into the new year, ready to continue and complete that project.
Lovely, thank you. And my second one was 244, the on-call station project. Can I ask what that is? Is that updating
Yes. So,
existing stations?
yes, it's a new project. There was 10 stations altogether. We started with Pontyclymmer. It's looked at a trend analysis
Yeah.
has been undertaken by the property team. They've developed a ranking order based on the state of the properties. So it's 10 on-call stations altogether. I mean, our requirements have grown over the years. You know, the PPE has grown. We've now got the red kit.
Yeah.
So there's bigger requirements in terms of storage.
Yeah.
You know, and the site doesn't, you know, it hasn't expanded at all with those additional requirements. And also we looked at the energy aspects on those stations. So dry rooms, for example, they can be on all day, can't it's dry kit. So we've got new technology in place whereby it only comes on if the sensor picks up moisture in the air. So reducing our sort of utility costs, which is what we try to do on all of our projects. We try and future-proof them so our ongoing utility running costs are reduced moving forward.
Thank you very much.
But it is storage and sort of, gym arrangements and the learning environment that they've got, because they've got very limited space on some of these stations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Anybody else got any questions for Lisa?
Can I just, before going on, Councillor Nwami's put a message on the chat function that any members, if you're raising any questions, can you indicate which page number you're referring to?
Yeah, sorry, that was my fault.
Members can follow.
Jumped in, I normally see page 22 or,
Yeah.
I apologise for that, that was my fault.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
The only question I got, with the property and the slippage, what timelines for this cycle? Have we got to do some of this work?
If I only knew.
It just suddenly sort of come in my head.
With the on-call, are we specifically relating this to the on-call project or all of them?
Well, it's more like the projects, you know, like the property projects.
Yeah.
You know, we got slippage, but, you know.
So for New Inn, as you know,
Yeah, I know.
that's not progressing at the moment in terms of the new site. It was turned down by Mileway. So we're looking at putting together some design, some specifications for the existing site. Because after the Mileway sort of work fell through, there was very little options to move to. I don't know if you want to come in on this, Dewi.
No, I like as Lisa outlined, our preferred option was go to a new site. That has unfortunately been the case. So now what I can assure you, the fire authority members, is that we are going through a design phase now. I've got a team on it, and how long will it take? We're progressing it to do it at the earliest opportunities. However, we know through big projects that could be 18 months, 2 years down the line before we finally occupy. Even it could be a bit longer. So for New Inn, it could be 2 years down the road. But what we are doing is progressing it as quickly as we can.
Well, I understand that. It was just more about the slippage of the money you got allocated for that particular project.
That doesn't go away. We move that forward. I think members are probably aware of the inflation crisis that we face at the moment. The question is whether that budget that we've set aside is enough. You know, if they continue to increase, that's something that we can address in time. New Inn in particular will be a complicated project because, you know, what do we do with crews when we're doing that major refurb? And that is a major refurb. So how do we house them? How do we keep operational? It's got a lot of moving parts, that project. But most of it can be between 6 and 12 months before you get a shovel in the ground with a big project like that, because the design work, once you've got a basic piece of design, we consult then with the station to see does that work or not. So we do a sense check. So there's quite a lot of work to be done up front before we actually get any construction work completed. So Debbie's quite right in saying we could be 2 years down the line before we see anything in completion. And I think that's really just what we've got to get our heads around, that these are longer term projects that won't be completed within the financial year. But the on-call project, a little bit different. It's the number of sites rather than the one thing. And to be honest, we've got an initial timeline of 2 years to get a number of them done, but they won't be done in 2 years. We're probably looking at a 5-year time horizon for them, but to get it right is the most important thing. You know, we're about sustainable spend and make sure that that's done right the first time rather than having to correct things later.
Oh, great. I just
Yes.
wanted so the new members understand that where that
Yeah.
money sort of.
There are no restrictions on how many years we slip the money forward for. Obviously, it's for members, to challenge us and through scrutiny to make sure that we're not slipping things forward just for the sake of carrying the budget forward. That there is, proper plan programs in place to deliver on some of these projects.
Just,
Yep, well,
sorry, as a final bit, a lot of these projects, in fact, most of them will have planning permission attached to them to the local authorities, and we've got no idea how long they're going to be approved. I think for the tower project, so the demolition of the five towers we've got on our various sites, we've possibly been waiting 10 to 11 months just to get planning permission approved on some of them. So, some things are just out of our hands there. And if there is a time issue, sometimes that is part of the explanation.
yeah. Oh, dear.
Sorry, one more question. It's on page 34 in the audit. I didn't see another agenda item for that.
Yeah,
I thought it was just.
That'll be
appendix.
item 7. That one.
Statement of accounts.
I do apologise.
That's all right. You'll get that. Anybody else got any other questions regarding this one at the moment?
Yeah. Sure.
No? Well, the recommendation for this is that this report is noted and members approve the budget slippage as detailed in Appendix 1. So is everybody happy with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Would somebody like to propose a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. All right. We then move on to item 7, which is a statutory audit and annual statement of accounts, and that's page 29.
So this area, yes, me again. This area encompasses a number of different documents. Okay, so we've got the audit plan by Audit Wales, statement of accounts, ISA 260, the audited statement of accounts, and the letter of representation. So the first in that package of documents to be covered off as part of the annual statement of accounts process is the Audit Wales audit plan, and I'll hand you over to Jill Gillett is with us today to present the plan, or was?
Right. Yeah, still am. I hope you can see me. Thanks, Lisa. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Gillian Gillett. I'm the Financial Audit Manager for South Wales Fire. And as Lisa's just said, this is our audit plan for the 2022 financial audit year. A little bit later than we would have liked it to come to you because of the timings of committees, but here we are. So the 2022 audit plan just sets out the work we plan to do to discharge our statutory responsibilities, and it informs you when it will be undertaken, how much it will cost, and who will undertake the work. So our responsibilities in respect to the financial statements are set out in paragraph 11, and they are to give an opinion on the truth and fairness of your financial statements, to assess whether the narrative report and the annual governance statement comply with SIPFA requirements and are consistent with our knowledge of the financial statements. In undertaking our work, we adopt a concept of materiality, that is, misstatements that might result in the reader of the accounts being misled. So the level we judge misstatements to be material will be reported to you prior to the completion of our audit in our financial statements report, which is the next item on the agenda. And that's generally around 2% of your expenditure. So our audit approach is based upon our assessment of the risks of material misstatement. And at the planning stage of the audit, we identified 3 risks, which were summarised in Exhibit 1 on page 47 of your pack. So that sets out then the risks and the work we plan to do to address them. So the 3 risks were management override of controls. That's viewed as a significant risk in all audit bodies in accordance with auditing standards. Also asset valuations. There's been quite a lot of uncertainty with COVID, Brexit, increases in building costs as to the value of assets. And then there was the McLeod judgment and the immediate detriment cases. Details of our performance work are then set out on Exhibit 2 on page 51, and that's going to be covering the audit of the improvement plan and assessment of performance under the local government measure, and then value for money thematic reviews, which this year will be false fire alarms. And if we move on to Exhibit 3 on page 52, that's at the estimated fee for 2022, which is £75,135. That's just an increase of 3.9% on the baseline fee from last year. Our general fees have gone up this year as a result of cost pressures. And that was set out in our consultation. And then the last exhibit then just sets out the main members of our team, which, as I said, of myself is the financial audit manager. Got Nick Selwyn, who's the performance audit manager, who'll be along a little bit later to do our presentation. Then we've got Jenny Morris leading on financial audit and Charles Rigby leading on the performance audit. And if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Anybody got any questions? Yeah, by all means, carry on.
Sorry, you did mention it, Gillian. Management override. Could you explain it to me, please?
Well, that's a concept that's set out in auditing standards, and basically all organisations, yourself included, put in place controls to manage how things are operated. But because of the position of management, you can always override those controls so that they don't work quite so effectively. So we do extra procedures to make sure that there is the risk of management override is minimised. So to do that, we tend to look at journals, any estimates, because they can be manipulated, and anything that's outside the course of normal business.
I've got one question. This might throw a spanner in the works, but because you're doing everything online and being in a financial situation and being prudent, the fees have gone up. Yet we're doing less face to face, and we're doing it through ICT means. Do you think that would be beneficial for the cost to be cut rather than increased?
We're still doing exactly the same as we've always done, just because we're doing it through Teams rather than, face to face. We're not doing any less. Perhaps we're doing a little bit more, or we certainly were in the early parts of the pandemic, but our audit approach is the same as it's always been. So, and costs, as you know, have gone up quite a lot generally, and our audit costs haven't gone up for a number of years. So that is why they've gone up this year.
Yeah, it was just a prudent question of, finances, value for money and everything. So, any other members got any questions you'd like to ask?
No.
Members are aware of the McLeod case. Is anybody? Because the audit actually said about the McLeod, and
No.
is there any way you can give some sort of
I think probably, Chair, if members are particularly interested in the risks around the McLeod case, probably the best thing I can advise them to do is take a look at the local pension board agenda and minutes, because it does go into a fair amount of detail there as a result of the discussions that have taken place and the background to it. It's quite a long subject matter, and I think if we start the detail of it now, we might hold a complete new local pension board meeting within this meeting. So I think that's probably my best advice. In essence, I'll try and summarise. It was a legal case which involved age discrimination within the pension schemes for firefighters. And as a result of that, the Fire Authority, together with all fire authorities in the UK, is attempting to correct that age discrimination. And some of the cases, the current cases, i.e. those people who have either already retired under those new conditions or are about to retire under those conditions, are deemed to be what is known as immediate detriment cases. And there's an ongoing process to try and establish how we can correct those pensions as timely and as quickly as possible. But the full detail of that, which is very complex, is included within the local pension board papers for the authority, if anybody wants to avail themselves of them and give it a read.
No, thanks for that, Chris, because the thing is, we're looking at these things through the audit, and if people are agreeing on something they don't know anything about it.
I think we'll come. I'll remind me if I don't, Chairman. I'll touch on it when we actually come to the audit of accounts and mention it again.
But yeah, anybody else got any questions? Does everybody? Do we need to note that one down, Lisa? Because there's nothing recommendation.
Yeah, it's just for noting there, Chair.
The members happy to note that?
Yes,
Yes. That's great. Thank you very much. Right.
Next part on page 41.
Yeah, so Following on from the annual audit plan, we've got the statement of accounts. This is again a standard piece of work that's produced every year at the end of the year. It gives members and all other stakeholders a view of our financial position and our financial performance for the year. And it sets this out, it's quite a hefty document, but it sets this out majorly in 5 sort of key statements, which is the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the movement in reserve statement, the balance sheet, which sort of identifies all our assets and liabilities, pensions included there, and cash flow. So those are the main financial statements there. It does, as Jill picked up in her audit presentation, it does include other documents like the narrative report, the annual governance statement, and things like that. Those 4 main statements are supplemented by notes to the accounts, quite a lot of notes to the accounts on the subsequent pages. And it also includes the, I don't know what the 5th statement was, the pension statement, the firefighter pension statement, which is on the last pages, and some supplementary information there. So this goes public after today. If members want to receive that, it's signed and put on a website and made public for any stakeholders to access.
So the recommendations for that, Lisa, is that the members receive the ISA 260 report, the appointed order, and note the letter of representation.
I think
We'll come to that bit.
yeah, at this moment in time, we've just got the audited statement of accounts.
Right.
That's been circulated separately to the
Right,
main
yeah.
papers because it is quite big. And then Jen Morris, who is the Audit Wales representative, will take you through the implications of the ISA 260 report, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's
So
all right.
if
Yeah.
there's any questions on the actual statement of accounts at this moment, I'm happy to take them.
That's fine.
Not sure if I've jumped in, Chair. I'm sure you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I was looking at page 61. Is that
Jen will cover that.
That'll be the next one, yeah, that's right.
The actual statement was sent out separate from
Right.
the rolling document.
Oh, yes.
Because it was quite big, you know.
Yeah.
It's the 84 page.
Yeah, that's the.
Yeah. I think that's it then, is it?
So you covered that item 7, and
So it's now the ISA 260 report.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is item 8 then, isn't it?
Is it all part of one?
No,
No, it's the same one.
It's all part
It's all
of
part
it.
of
It's part
one.
of confusing me because it's about
Yeah,
4
well,
different bits in it.
Chair.
And rather than itemized on the agenda.
It's
it's-
appendix 4 on
Page
page
47.
47, appendix 4.
Yeah, if members move to page 47, then that'll be the next stage of that report. It is confusing, usually if you look on the agenda. And that's the audit of accounts report, South Wales Fire and Rescue Service.
At this point, I'll hand you over to Jen, who will walk you through the ISA 260 report and all the implications. Morning, Jen.
Morning, Lise. Thanks for handing over and thanks to the chair. Like's already been said, this report starts on page 47 of the pack. So I'm going to assume that this has sort of been read. So I'll just go through the highlights here. So if I start, just refer to paragraph 4 on page 50. This sort of gives the level of materiality used in this year's audit, as Gillian referred to earlier. So you've got a level of 2.2 million for the main South Wales fire audit. And then we have a separate materiality of 0.57 million for the firefighter pension fund. And also to draw your attention to the senior officer and related party materiality levels of £1,000. So if we move on to exhibit 1, which is on page 51. Here we've just got saying that the draft accounts were submitted on the 1st of June, which they were on time, and that we are expecting the report to be signed off tomorrow, pending your approval today. So as has already been mentioned, the audit's been undertaken remotely, and just take a moment here to thank the staff and the finance team because they've been great, responded to queries really quickly, always available. So just to take a moment to thank the team there, Lise.
I pass on you. Thank you to you both as well, Jen. They worked really well together this year.
Yeah, it's been a smooth audit, so that's been great. Just to move to the significant issues before I touch on the actual opinion. There's been no uncorrected misstatements this year, as you can see in paragraph 12. There's been one corrected misstatement, which you could see in Appendix 3, which is on page 61. This is an amount of 627k and was basically an amendment due to incorrect accounted treatment of revaluation gains. There are no other significant issues arising from the audit this year, so we intend to issue an unqualified audit opinion once the letter of representation has been provided to us. So just to identify, an unqualified audit opinion is good. so I'm sure you're all happy with that. We've got no specific recommendations to raise here. Any of the matters will be followed up in a management letter. So it's quite a quick whiz through. There's not really much to report this year. So that's really it from me on the ISA 260. But feel free to ask any questions at this stage.
Have we got any questions?
Yes, I've arrived now.
I think we all have.
Yes, it's on Appendix 3. It's just noted, I sort of accept it. It seems to be a technical point about the £627,000 in terms of definition, but it is a substantial sum. I just wondered if you could comment on, is this something that it would pop up on a regular basis and was easily resolved, or was there more to it?
No, it won't crop up again because the amendment made has corrected the error, so it won't happen. Well, it shouldn't happen again next year. So it was just just an incorrect accountment treatment, but the team have amended that and corrected that now, so it shouldn't be something that should reoccur unless a similar error is made again in the future. Does that answer the question, or would you like any more information there?
Oh, yeah, I think so. But I also note that it doesn't affect the overall balances. No. That's the key thing there, isn't it?
It's not a cash transaction. No. That one, it was linked to the valuation of our estates and just the way that we cycle that figure through the actual accounts, if that makes sense. So it wasn't a payment for anything that was sort of misaccounted or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Procedural.
Yeah. So it's $1,000. Okay.
Chris, yeah.
Okay.
I'll just touch back on the immediate detriment cases that I mentioned earlier under this item, because I think it was raised as a risk in terms of the audit plan. And obviously we were aware and were talking to the audit team around this issue in terms of the things that the fire authority were doing to try and rectify these immediate detriment cases. The approach the authority has taken in respect of dealing with these cases is to actually constrain any adjustments that we've done to pensions to the pure pension elements of those settlements. So effectively, we've put people's pensions right in terms of the amount of lump sums they've been receiving, in terms of the pensions that they are now receiving, and also in terms of any contributions, more or less, they should have made towards those pensions. So those have been done and they're reflected in the pension fund within the accounts. What we've not done as an authority, in order to avoid any confusion and potential issue with regard to these matters, is we've not tried to adjust for taxation matters and things like that, which will come to pass. I mean, there's legislation being drafted in government to deal with some of these issues in terms of how the taxation elements have impacted on individual members affected by these changes, but we've not sought to change any of those items yet, which is why I think the audit team were comfortable that there's nothing in this set of accounts which represents a financial risk to the authority. But those things will be coming down the line in we think about 12 months' time to be dealt with. But when they are dealt with, they'll be backed by government legislation, so they hopefully will not be an issue then either.
Thank you. I think we're happy with that. Is there any other questions, for the audit team? No? But if we go to the recommendation, is that the members receive the ISA 260 report of the appointed order and approve the letter of representation contained therein, and that members approve the audited statement of accounts provided electronically. Are we all in agreement with that?
Yes.
Okay, somebody like propose and second it?
Propose.
That's it.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you for that, Lisa. We move on to the next item then, is item 8, internal audit progress report and audit action update, and that's on page 63.
Unfortunately, this is me again.
I know you volunteer for these things, Lisa.
So this report provides members with an update on progress made against internal audit actions, and it looks in particular at the mitigating controls and station visits. So I'll hand you over to Steen Goley, who's here from TIAA, who's going to take us through the reports and the findings. Morning, Steen.
Good morning, Lisa. Good
Morning.
morning, members. Yeah, as Lisa said, so I think the covering report gives a lot of the information that would probably go through. Just to give you some background, I'm an audit manager for TIA. TIA are the internal auditors for the service. We've been your auditors for a number of years now. We were appointed last year. We have an audit plan each year. We look at a number of areas and we put those into you through these reports and through the progress report. The progress report provides you a kind of an update of where we are with the plan for the year and identifies any particular issues you think worth drawing to your attention, particularly around fraud and that kind of thing. As Lisa said, the reports in your pack this time round are the mitigating controls, station visits and a progress report. If I briefly take you through each of those in turn, if there are any questions, please let me know. But if I start with the mitigating controls report. Some of the older members will remember that this is an audit we undertake every year. So what we're looking to do is identify a number of risks from the authority's risk register, from the services risk register, and provide assurance that the risk controls are in place or being implemented as described within BMIS. And so this time round, we looked at equality and diversity, health and well-being, high rise and terrorism. And as you can see, good level of control, all the control risk tasks were being progressed. And there's evidence and discussions with management to evidence that. There were no priority 1 or priority 2 recommendations, but there was a good level of good practice under each of the headings, really. But just to draw your attention to some of the areas identified, some of the significant good practice. So you'll see from the report, so positive action, so there's initiatives around positive action in terms of equality and diversity. There's establishment of a health and well-being delivery group in terms of health and well-being. Good examples of working collaboratively within the Welsh Government and the Welsh Fire Services in respect to high rise, and review of national interagency liaison officer, the NILO resistance, and the terrorism. That comes back with some of the resilience issues you talked about, retirement. So there are a number of officers with the NILO training that they're looking to retire, and there was an ongoing arrangements to replace those through training for that. As I say, no full recommendations, only one priority 3 recommendation, which is a routine recommendation. So looking at BMIS, there were a number of recommendations had either a question mark symbol or NR, and management have looked at that, and they're going to provide explanations around what those mean. And one of the issues they encountered through that was that potentially there's a lack of clarity on who was responsible for the risk or the control risk task. And we recommended that if there's somebody not in place at that point in time, there's an escalation to the risk owner, and all of that has been accepted. So I'm happy to take any questions on that report.
Anybody got any questions for Steen? I know there was something nice there waiting.
Thank you.
No, I think you got away quite easy for that one.
Thanks, yeah. The next report then you've got is for station visits. Again, some of the older members will remember that each year we undertake a review of station visits. So we probably look at 3 stations, 2 full-time, 1 on-call station. Primarily that's around financial administration and duty of care, health and safety. For this year, the report in 21-22, we took a different approach, and we looked at the internal arrangements through the operation audit and support team and the visits that they undertake. And as you can see, a substantial assurance opinion with only 1 routine recommendation. So just give you some background in terms of what we're looking at. So the operational audit and support team undertake a series of audits throughout the year. So they've got the program itself is essentially 4 parts: the site visits, there's mock exercises, there's operational learning, and there's also horizon scanning and risk assessment, which contributes to the kind of the program of audit that takes place by that team. Their own site visits have 4 parts as well. So they're looking at prevention, preparedness, premises and facilities, and also station administration. And as you can see from the key strategic findings, that program has been developed over time through a range of stakeholders. So it's a very comprehensive program covering all the areas that the service thinks it should be looking at as part of that site visit. There's a program of audit visits. So a cyclical program, and as you can see from strategic findings, that program has continued throughout COVID and has had no impact. So those visits have still taken place, and those mock exercises have still taken place during that time. There was, as I say, there was one recommendation, which was relating to when an audit has been undertaken, a number of actions might be arising from that audit, and the recommendation was to capture those in some way, preferably through BMUS. That has been accepted, and as I understand it, that's now been implemented. And again, some good practice identified through the audit. So you can see there the documents, practical drills and programme of visits available to all staff. So that ensures the station are aware of and able to act in accordance with those defined regulations and guidance. So again, I'm happy to take any questions on that report.
Anybody got anything about station visits? No? Must have done a good visit then, Steve. Would you like to move on to the next one? Great, then.
So the last one in your pack is what we call a summary internal controls assurance report, a second report. But for laypersons understands that's a progress report. And as I say, it updates you on the work that we've undertaken in the year. We've yet to undertake any of the reviews for this year, but the first 2 are scheduled for the week after next, beginning the 8th of August. Just some key features in terms of what's in the report. So over time, you'll see in paragraph 8, root cause indicators. So you'll see in producing our reports, we try to identify what the root causes of individual recommendations. And what we hope to do then is track those over time to give the service and yourselves an idea of where particular issues are arising. You can see from that we've included in the results from last year's 21-22, which was included in the annual plan. So the idea is to track over time any particular issues and kind of, if possible, make any recommendations or improvements in those areas. The other thing, excuse me, the other thing I would perhaps draw your attention to is the other matters. We produce a series of client briefing notes, so that's topical issues, themes, areas, as I say, particularly around fraud and matters relating to cyber, and we provide those to the service to take action if appropriate. For this time round, the most recent ones, as you can see, paragraph 10, more than 75% of larger charities targeted for cyber criminals since the last year. I think that kind of the wider context is cost of living crisis has led to an increase in fraud, unfortunately, and also the conflict in Ukraine has also led to an increase in cybercrime. So these client briefing notes are to draw your attention to those particular types of matters. Just for some background, a smishing is a fraudulent text message. I'm sure we've all received those. And a push payment is a fraudulent request for a payment. Usually that's transacted through a faster payment or in your personal life through your online banking. And the reason the fraudster is able to get away with it is because of that faster payment method. They're able to take your money and run before you realise that you've made that fraud. It's a fraudulent claim in the first place. As I say, the last paragraph then is Appendix A. It gives you an outline of what's in the plan for this year, and the first audit's beginning on the 8th of August, and we'll update this as we go through the year. So again, I'm happy to take any questions on the progress report.
Yeah, I'm going to ask, noting on page 84, there's the serious concern about cyber crime and the effect that it's had on larger organisations. You mentioned charities. How is that reflected in a plan on page 82, where we've got the ICT network security review slotted in for Q3? Should that be brought forward if possible?
we have a rolling program of IT audits. We look at cybercrime, network security, and there's another one as well. We look at data assurance as well as a rolling program. We put it in as Q3 just to give that balance. As you can see, there's kind of a rough number of audits coming to each of the to the finance and performance management meetings each time. So it can be. I can discuss that with Geraint and Lisa, and we can look at the best timing for that audit. With yeah, so I need to just to be confirmed because we've got issues in terms of resourcing with our IT team, but I would need to come back to yourselves and to Geraint and Lisa to arrange a particular time for that audit.
It is just for members' assurance, the cyber security audit is one that is a sort of frequent audit that we do. So it may well have been done either last financial year or the year before, but it's something that is fairly frequently reviewed, and we do ongoing work in-house to ensure that we can mitigate everything we can possible against cyber attacks. So we do have external consultants come in and test our systems as well as part of the ongoing audit plan program.
Okay.
Right,
That's fine, thank you.
The thing I would like to ask, Steve, is on the root cause indicated, which is page 79, we were doing it quarterly, now you're doing it on a sustained rolling period. Is there any specifics why we're doing that different approach? Was your other system one working on a quarterly, or is that why we've gone to a different rolling program?
No, it'll still be quarterly. I think the issue here is the timing of when the audits take place. So
Right.
the first quarter audits, the first ones, as I say, are the week after next. So you probably at the next Q2, depending on the timings of the Q2 audits, you'll probably get Q1 and some of Q2 reporting in the next report. It's all to do with the timings of when we would take the audit and when the meeting takes place.
That's great. Thanks very much for that. So any members still got any more questions, 16, or are we all happy with the report?
I think 2 good reports, actually.
Yeah. If we move with the recommendation, everybody's happy and there's no more questions. Members are asked to note the internal audit recommendation and work completed to date on the internal audit annual plan 2022-2023. We can pull a second up.
Yeah.
And everybody happy with that?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you very much. We then move on to item 9, which is the performance monitoring report. And
I'll take this one. I don't plan on taking members through the performance monitoring report or agenda item 10, the business plan. We sent out electronic links to the reports purely because
page 87 again.
Yeah, sorry, on pages 87 and 89. These reports went to the Fire Authority 2 weeks ago, so they're the exact same reports that went then. And obviously, we took, myself and Dewi took members through these reports in detail. And the reason that we've sent them out like this, obviously, that they've already been presented. Normally, they would come to the Finance Audit Committee for consideration first before going to the Fire Authority. That's what happens in the normal cycle of the municipal year. But because of the July Finance Audit Committee always takes place at the end of the last possible Monday in July, to ensure that we got as much time as possible to get the audited statement of accounts through and the ISO 260 report completed. In July, we always flip the meetings around, so the Fire Authority takes place before the Finance Committee. So that's the reason why we've sort of just included them electronically today, and we don't plan on going through them in any detail. Obviously, members have had a chance to have a look at them. If there are any questions that didn't come up in the Fire Authority meeting 2 weeks ago, or if there's anything further clarification, anyone from me or Dewi, I'm sure we'll be able to take any questions. So.
Anybody got any questions?
No, as a report chair, I think the questioning was all really thorough at that meeting, and there's lots of scrutiny went on then.
Yeah,
so that's right.
And I will say they're very, very good reports, particularly of your own local boroughs and everything else. Yeah. And it's a good help to pass it on to fellow colleagues as well to see what the service actually does in their area. But
I understand members have been sent those individual reports now, and also, as was raised by one of the councillors, a report of 2019 to compare it. You should have had those as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, go on.
One thing in there, and I did notice it 2 weeks ago, but I didn't know if it was just a slip of the tongue, but it's actually written down here. Automatic false alarms, is that the same as automatic fire alarms? You just change the wording?
Yeah.
Or is it a different thing?
Yeah, so it could be an automatic fire alarm. It could be, so yeah, it could be one of the same. Could cover all. You got me thinking about it. So you want repeat your question, please.
Right, automatic false alarms, AFAs is automatic false alarms, but an AFA can be a fatal fire. An automatic fire alarm isn't automatically a false alarm. It can be a fatal fire.
So this is where we've gone then. It's been steam or breakage of a glass breakpoint, or somebody knocked a detector head, so accidentally set off a fire alarm, not where it's gone off and there's been a fire.
So it's confirmed false alarms as opposed to
rather than
automatic
it's been caused by a fire.
Yeah, and I only didn't ask it the other week because I didn't want to think I was picking on you.
No. That's what
As we said
that's what I'm
previously,
here for, to
question
try and
is
answer
stupid questions.
Yeah.
So,
And I did have another question on the talent spotting. It's in the report. The staff have asked about investing in all. And looking at the potential retirement profile of the strategic and upper managers, I didn't know if that's proceeding, because we're going to need some young blood coming through, because I think you've got 98 years in too.
Man or boy.
Obviously.
No, you know what I mean. There's a lot of the top table could go tomorrow. If they win the lottery, they could just turn on and hand their notice in. And I didn't know with the succession planning, it's not all about talent spotting, is it? It's about giving everyone a chance.
No, so through our workforce progression and what we launched, you may have, I'm not sure what committees everybody's on, but the launch of our pathways. We are looking for how we identify the potential in everyone to fulfill their potential, and that will mean ultimately some people being supported in their development to get the middle, senior, and more principal officer roles. So there are things in place.
I think you've got future leadership, and
we are developing, I say, our pathways. That we've got a number of people going to external courses called the Executive Leadership Programme, which is across the UK. So that is helping with developing their potential with a view of they could become a senior manager within the service. So it's something that we are looking at, and I'd say we always have, but we're looking at what products are out there, what development courses and other things that are out there.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want to add it? No, I'd say it's directly linked to some of the topic we touched on right at the start when we talked about levers and retention and recruitment. So it's just at that making sure there's a system of developing people through the structures, so that there's potential for the future then. And as you know, there's always been good people within the service, and there's plenty of people with potential.
That's right. And the thing I was getting at was, I know they've done it in the past where people jump a level and go up, but it's not just future proofing what we can deliver, it's future proofing the safety of all our people. And I don't think jumping a level.
No, so when we say talent spotting, sorry for cutting across, but we're not saying people accelerated promotion. We're not looking at that, even though that is being looked at across the UK. Within our pathways, it's certainly for uniform roles really essential that people, in my view, get that experience of dealing with in charge of small incidents, and then as they progress through the service, they get the incidents they'd be expected to be responsible for, and the safety of others would become increasingly larger. To what we have found, if we get people that haven't got that experience and say jump 2 rounds, then it does become problematic on the incident ground, where ultimately they will be responsible for the safety of our crews and the public, and we're very conscious we have to manage that as well.
Yeah, and that's where I was coming in from, was the safety point of view for the public and the crews, yeah. Thank you.
Excellent question, yeah. So everybody's happy to note them? Like I said, we've already
Yes.
previously, we looked through it, so kind of, you know. So that's incorporated with item 10, so we don't need to do that. So we move on to item 11, that's the audit Wales report, joint working between emergency services. That's on page 91. Yeah, nice to see you, Nick.
Yeah, good morning. Sorry I'm a bit late to the meeting. I was attending Mid and West Wales' equivalent of this meeting.
Yeah, this one's all over to you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I did have a presentation to share, but I don't have the opportunity to share screen. Apparently it's been removed, so I'll talk to the report rather than try and share a presentation, if that's okay. And if members have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Just a bit of background to our work then. This particular piece of work we started before the pandemic actually started. So in March 2020, we published our forward programme of national studies, and included in it was one piece of work looking at how the emergency services in Wales are collaborating and potentially integrate. Sorry?
Nick, can I just send the presentation through to me and we'll see if we can get it loaded up this side?
We've just set as a presenter.
Oh, they just set you up as a presenter. You should have the option
I have
now.
got it. I think you will got this, but I will try my best.
Even easier.
We'll order you doing it.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
This work, as I was saying, we originally planned to deliver from March 2020, and I think literally we sent out the project brief for the study a week before the pandemic started becoming the issue it turned out to be. So it's gone through a fairly significant period of time to get to where we are today. And over the life of the work, it's changed in some ways. But hopefully with the report you have before you does give you a good sense of where things stand currently between the 8 bodies of responsibility for planning and delivering the emergency services we all depend on. So our overall question hierarchy was really focused on 3 things, really about answering this question around collaboration and integration. Firstly, what are you currently doing together as organisations? Secondly, how well are you actually doing it? And then thirdly, what are the options for doing things differently and better in the future? So in terms of work, as I say, it was launched in 2020. Originally planned this as a 2-staged audit. And the first part was very much about collating information on the resources, budgets, fleet assets, staff, etc. each of the 8 bodies have in place. And we work very closely with our colleagues in the financial audit teams to help us collate that information. Then the second part was originally planned to be a deeper dive to find out where there are opportunities to make services more resilient to that better collaboration, integration, and so forth. I think because of the pandemic, and quite rightly given the focus on emergency services very much being in the front line in responding to those very challenging times, we sort of took stock midway through the study and really changed our emphasis and approach. So in May, we published a revised set of references, which really looked at the work of the Joint Emergency Services Group, and I'll touch on that shortly, and particularly the collaboration work that's taken place in that environment. We also looked at some of the things that you put in place as emergency services in responding to COVID, and how those were being sort of played through to become almost the norm in terms of your working practices. And then really just a very brief review of opportunities and barriers to further collaboration and integration, particularly with a focus on wider learning. What could we learn from elsewhere in Great Britain, and what could other parts of the country learn from what's happening in Wales? That's a very brief introduction to the work itself. The report itself has got three sections. The first part really talks about the case for collaboration, why it's really important. And I think our overall conclusion was that we could see there's a strong history of emergency services working very closely together. And there is clear expectation, certainly in recent years, to the policy framework that's been set both by the UK government, which obviously has responsibility for policing within Wales, but also within the Welsh government's approach, where they've really made clear that their anticipation and expectation is that emergency services will work closer together to make better use of resources. I think we sort of very clearly set out in our report that this isn't a new concept. It's something that you've been doing for a long time, and that wasn't unsurprising. There are so many good examples of the things you're currently doing, and particularly in South Wales with the shared services, you have joint control rooms and so forth. But that list there just gives you a sense of the direction of travel that's been set at that highest policy level and where the expectations lie. The two that are specific to Wales, one you're very well aware of, which is something that ministers in recent years have spoken about at length, around broadening the role of the firefighter, and that's something that's ongoing and hasn't come to its conclusion. But the other one, which is really important, are the two pieces of legislation that have been passed by the Welsh Parliament. Firstly, the Wellbeing of Future Generations, and then secondly, the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. Both of these really give a direction of travel about how you should be looking to work more collectively with your key partners. The one thing I would say, however, in our report, and that's set out on page 105, we do acknowledge that not everything you undertake as an organisation requires you to collaborate and integrate your service responses, and it would be quite right for you to continue to work as you always have in delivering those services. And we call this the joint working continuum. So I'll just give you a sort of sense of the sort of things we're talking about. So what we classified as 4 different things. There are things that you will always do independently and on your own, because that's the best way of delivering the service and the most efficient and effective way of doing it. The activity is very much specific to the fire and rescue service, has little bearing influence on any other emergency service partner, so we wouldn't expect to see collaboration taking place. And some examples are listed there: home fire safety visits, police and patrols, that sort of thing. We also recognise, however, there are certain things which you deliver which are dependent on others as well, where you either need to exchange information because you're both tied into responding to emergency, or there is something that you're doing in common, which the best way of doing it is to work together. And the sort of things that we see regularly, these sort of occurrences happening, are things like road traffic collisions, responding to arson, and then major incidents where obviously the emerging planning structure comes into play. And then at the top end, the bit where I guess the expectation is that you'll get the best return and the best use of resources, is around collaboration and integration. And the way that we've defined it is that collaboration is where each organisation remains independent, but you have to work together to get the best return. So it's particularly in areas like use of resources, buildings, staff, how you use funding. And there's things like the joint control room, which we know you've got shared stations, which again you've done, and things like joint fleet maintenance contracts. And then integration is where you deliberately blur the organisation boundaries and create a new entity where there's a single management, governance and delivery structure. So I think we saw some really good examples of the rationale for independent working and collaboration. And integration, I think we concluded is important, but probably not on the agenda at this precise moment. And if you're looking for some definition of how you could sort of classify and understand the differences between the two, this is the process we use. So we see collaboration is where you work together collectively to get the best response you can in responding to a particular issue. Integration is where you probably go that stage further, where you look to combine structures and services, and you blur roles and responsibilities, and the sort of governance and accountability very much mixed together. So that's how we've sort of presented it. Part 2 of our report then talks about how well services are working together at this time. And in particular, we take great stock by the work of the Joint Emergency Services Group. We think that's been a really important catalyst for how you, as emergency services, have started to work together. It's fundamentally had one of the main roles in how Wales as a country responded to the pandemic, and the planning role and collaboration that was brought forward by that very senior leadership group was no doubt central to how we've managed to get through the pandemic as we have. And again, I just emphasise that in our discussions with the Joint Emergency Services Group, it became very clear that there's a real appetite for collaboration going further and faster. For integration, I think the case is not really made at this stage, certainly for senior leaders to move down that route. And then the rest of the section really brings together some of the data we referenced right at the start. So there's some good examples of how we've used the information that's been provided to us to start analysing and identifying some opportunities to make better use of the resources that are available. And it covers a number of areas. Firstly, estates. Secondly, around fleet. Thirdly, around joint calls, joint services. And then finally, around how you use information. So in each of these, we had some really good examples of how you're already doing certain things, but there are opportunities and undoubtedly that you could do things slightly differently. And I'll just give one example. So this is a graphic showing all the stations that are provided by emergency services in Wales. So ambulances are in yellow, fire in orange, and the police are in sort of that turquoisey teal colour. So it gives you a sense across the country where they're all located. And then naturally from that, it falls out that in certain areas, you've probably got a huge number of buildings that could be rationalised and some opportunities to collaborate on estates to be brought forward. And the example in our report we talk about is in Pontypridd, where I think there are 72 emergency service buildings within 10-mile radius of Pontypridd town centre. Similarly, in Wrexham, there's 20, and in Swansea, 50 or so. So the sort of report sets out by organisation the various buildings. You'll note the table on the right-hand side talks about the proportion of buildings that are currently shared with another organisation. So South Wales Fire, you're probably at the top end of shared services at this time, 16%, slightly behind North Wales. So Fire and Rescue generally are pretty good at sharing services, with the exception of Mid and West, where I think the rurality issue probably plays a little more strongly. But overall, when you go through the list and you add in things like the emergency responders, bodies like the RNLI, search and rescue and so forth, it's roughly 7% of the state is currently shared. So from our work, we feel there's an opportunity for certainly the Joint Emergency Services Group to think through other opportunities to take forward this agenda. And then the final part really talks about your plans for the future. What are you looking to do to sort of take forward this work? Well, what we found was that the Joint Emergency Service Group had established what they call the Strategic Collaboration Board, and that information is set out on page 121. And that's really been given responsibility to identify and deliver future opportunities for joint working. The plans themselves are in various stages of development when we undertook our review. Some were clearly further advanced than others. But overall, it did really cover what we would consider to be the big ticket items, the things that would probably make or deliver opportunities for resources to be used more effectively, but also have the greatest impact on service delivery and the people that receive services. The one thing that we felt could be strengthened was really being clear about the potential to make savings and the potential impact of some of the policies and choices you were reviewing and going through with. And we think if you can get that right at the start, it will make the case for demonstrating the good work that you're doing. And then finally, the section ends with some examples of things that are happening elsewhere within Great Britain. And we draw on 3 examples we felt were quite interesting approaches that the Joint Emergency Services Group could consider. Firstly, the approach of the Scottish Emergency Services and their National Collaboration Strategy, which has been in place since 2014. Some work that Thames Valley have done collectively between the police, fire and rescue and ambulance service through their steering group. And then some more specific work in Bedfordshire and East of England, where they've been able to demonstrate the role of fire services in helping out the ambulance trust and the return on investment that makes. So really just underline that there are opportunities to think about how you present information to really show the powerful impact you have. Just in terms of the Strategic Collaboration Board, then we do set out the sort of work streams that are in there. And as I say, we think these are the ones that you should be focusing on. So, you know, no surprises there. It's clear that you've really got a good handle on the sort of areas you want to focus on taking forward. So each of these has got a specific plan in place and officers from across the range of emergency services working on delivering them. Then finally, just to sort of conclude and where things have got to. So we published our report in January and it makes 9 recommendations. Alongside our report, there's a data tool that brings the data that I've touched on to life in a bit more detail. So if you wanted to access the tool, it's available on our website, and it does give you the opportunity to interrogate information and compare different bodies and organisations. We also produced some additional case studies in the appendices to our report and a self-evaluation checklist for people to use within the individual working groups that you've set up. The report was received really positively by the Joint Emergency Services Group, and the chair wrote to the Auditor General accepting the findings, recommendations and thanking us for our work, particularly the fact that we did sort of change the direction to take account of the pandemic and being very conscious that we didn't want to be a burden to emergency services in that difficult time. And we do know that the Joint Emergency Services Group are using the findings to strengthen the current programme of work. I've been in liaison with, for example, the coordinator for JESEG fairly frequently just to check how things are going. And just to note, we've also presented the report to the Senate's Public Accounts and Public Administration Committee, and members are likely to do some follow-up on progress early in the next year, so early in January, February 2023. So that's a very quick run through, Chair. Happy to take any questions members may have or any other comment on the report.
Yeah.
And I'll stop sharing now.
Councillor Nawami, you wanted to ask a question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah. I was wondering really, how long has this sort of push for joint working or collaboration been going on? And where has the initiative come from? Is it sort of political from the Welsh Government, or is it that the services themselves have felt a degree of collaboration, might save them money or make them work more efficiently in terms, of attending to their various responsibilities? I've got another question after that, but let me put
okay.
that one first. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's come from both, actually. I think there's always been a strong tradition for emergency services to work together, simply by the nature of what you do as organisations. You have to be very closely tied to the police and to the Welsh Ambulance Service, simply because that's how you need to respond to critical incidents when they arise. I think there's also, as you correctly point out, some political expectation that you'll make better use of resources by working more closely. And that's come both from the UK government in terms of the Policing Act that was passed in 2016, but also from Welsh Government in the legislation that the Senate has passed. So the wellbeing of future generations very much talks about collaboration and integration of services that might make the best response available. So I think it's a bit of both.
Okay. Just sort of looking at the exhibit on page 114, when you look at all those figures relating to the fleet, so have sort of any work been done to sort of look at that table and say, well, can we model something to show that we can do things better, more efficiently, cheaper, maybe if there was more collaboration? Has there been any work there at all?
So when we were drawing the report together, Councillor, we had a discussion with all the fleet managers, and we met with them to really get, I guess, under the detail of some of the information. And probably two things came out of it. One, each had a slightly different approach to training and apprenticeships, and that was a common issue for all the services. So I think what we were seeing is that there was some agreement that we could do something collectively to start bridging that gap, make best use of the people we need to get in to help us maintain and improve the fleet. And then secondly, that led to then a discussion on, what can we do to standardise maintenance contracts, almost commissioned collectively, to see if we can get the best return. We know there's some really good examples that you already do that in certain areas. By presenting the data, hopefully it's just giving them the opportunity to think things through and take that forward. And we know that there is a specific work stream under the collaboration board that is looking at that very thing. So the points you're making are already being covered and hopefully will be followed through now.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Anybody else any questions? I got 7 waiting for you, Nick.
Yes, sorry.
God. David, do you want to come in first before?
Yeah, thanks. I noticed on one of the slides it said plans for collaboration, limited coverage, no consistent management arrangements in this. What do you see the authority's role in rectifying this problem?
Well, I think there's probably several, isn't there? One is to ensure that you are cited as the work that the Joint Emergency Services Group are undertaking, in particular the Strategic Collaboration Board. So you receive information through the sort of course of this committee's work in how you use resources to ensure that you're satisfied that the work that the organisation is doing is providing the best outturns. And that means you should be receiving reports, for example, on anything that results in a change in service, in how resources are being used, so you can check things are progressing. And then the other one I would say is that I think there's an opportunity for you to think through specifically as an organisation about how far you want to go down this route. I think in our report we talk very much around collaboration. I think it's for the authority then to consider, do you want to take that next step and move into integration? We're not saying you should, but it's certainly the logical flow once you've gone through lots of good examples of collaboration. Do we as an organisation have any thoughts on integration? And obviously that's something the authority has to think about.
Okay, with that, David?
Yeah, I was just wondering, would you see any use in an authority task and finish group working with like-minded bodies within the other service arrangements?
That's certainly happening on the ground, Councillor. Certainly officers from South Wales are working very closely with others through the collaboration boards. I guess the bit that you may not be that well sighted of is how that ties into the role of members within the authority and what role you could have in that. I think that would be one that I would expect you and Geraint to to work with the chair and so forth to think about how best to ensure you're figuring that.
Okay. All
Thanks,
right,
Nick.
David?
Yeah, just probably to pick up on that one, Nick, is obviously we're trying to re-energise and reinvigorate the National Issues Committee, which is just the 3 fire services. So members will have received a sort of briefing on that as part of the induction. Obviously, more work will be going on in that area, and obviously, as more work is done as part of the Joint Emergency Services Group, we'll feed that back through either through this committee or certainly through the scrutiny group in future.
That's an excellent point. I should have said, and this is my error. We did acknowledge in the report that there's a lot already taking place within services. So we do know, for example, that you benefit from the joint work you undertake with the other 2 fire and rescue authorities in Wales, but also the 51 that cover England and Wales. So we know there's a huge amount of work already in place, and no doubt that's been fed back to you. So apologies, I should have picked that up.
All right, thanks, Nick. Did you want to put a question in?
Yeah.
More of an observation, looking at the stuff you've done for the East of England, where the ambulance and the fire service have worked together, that's huge savings, and the fact that they freed up 600 ambulances, which have allowed them to meet all their category 1 life calls, is amazing. But if you're saving £7 million, what you're doing is, or what I don't want us to do is a fire authority is to provide a quick fix for the ambulance trust. It's you're putting a sticking plaster on a catastrophic wound, and you can see the value of working together. But I think that the governing bodies of the 3 agencies should talk, as well as the strategic managers, because we've all got varying commitments and priorities. Just an observation. One question, Nick.
I would agree with the councillor. I think that's entirely reasonable. What you don't want to do is, when you go down this route, is to weaken your own services and your own how you respond to your statutory responsibility. It is managing the 2 effectively. I would say, however, that ultimately Welsh Government has got a particular agenda in this area, and I don't want to get into that because it's still a bit uncertain about how that's going to be played out. But you're well aware of some of the challenges down the line on this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. You can have mine now. You ready? Or do you want a pen? The first one, I'm not against collaboration at all, but I've looked at this and I'm a bit dubious about some of it. What I'm saying is, so if firefighters are doing medical issues, our ambulance staff putting out fires, that's the next thing, and our police rescuing trapped people in RTCs. We're asking that. We're asking them to do different jobs, different things. And the second thing is the climate issue, seeing temperatures rise over 40 degrees. And we're getting excessive fires. You're now increasing the workload of the firefighting staff. The third thing is we're putting massive amounts of money pumped into the NHS, yet it's still failing. And leading on to that one, the negative impact on the NHS and the ambulance service is therefore maybe passed over to the fire service, so they be getting the same target and targeted the same brush. I mean, the fifth thing is there's no financial help to the service and staff offered up till now that I'm aware of. Question 6, we are collaborating successfully, supporting the NHS. We've done that, driving ambulances during COVID, and we are collaborating with all the services. But the one that threw me most of all, being the fleet champion for the fire service, is page 113 and 114, where vast expenditure of the ambulance fleet compared to any specialist fleet. On that page, you're looking at the mileage and the cost, the maintenance cost. I mean, you look at some of the mileage is being done there by even South Wales Police. It's nothing compared to what's going into the trust. I mean, we're on about collaborating, saving money, but looking and reflecting on that, I'd be alarmed if the fire service was operating on figures like that. Well, there we are. There's a nice view.
Okay, I'll try my best to remember all the questions, Councillor. So the first one really about, do we anticipate or expect to see officers from the police force undertaking fire duties and so forth? No, we don't. I think what we're talking about is the opportunity to collaborate, particularly in where you operate from, the bases you work from, the fleet you have in place, and make best use of those contracts. Where there is a need for a joint force, then that should be funded, and there's some good examples of where you do that already. We don't have an anticipation that you're looking to create a single officer that undertakes ambulance services, fire services, and police services. I would absolutely agree with you on the climate issue. That is the big risk that all public services face, and no doubt, as you're aware from our previous work, that we do know that South Wales has got plans in place and is doing things to hit that 2030 public sector net carbon emissions target, and we're well aware of that going on, and that does frame some of the work we're talking about here. If you can find efficient ways of delivering services that have less mileage use, less contribution to CO2 emissions, then that's surely a good thing. Your point around more money being spent on the NHS, yes, I'd agree. And in some ways, the level of demand on the service increasing and waiting lists going up, you could equate that to a failing service. I think it's just the fact of where we are at this precise moment. We've come through a pandemic which has delayed their ability to be able to tackle the waiting list they have in place. So it's not unexpected to see that service is struggling. And if anything, I think that makes the case for others to contribute and play a more active role. And the example in the East of England is one way of doing that. I don't ever foresee that the Fire and Rescue Service would be blamed, in my personal view, if you contributed to helping out other agencies. I think you would be applauded for assisting where you can and helping those organisations make the best use of their resources, but also deal with the many problems they face. And I think that's one of the strengths of the Fire and Rescue Service. You have a good history of collaboration and working with others, and I'm prepared to go the extra mile and help out. So I see this as an extension of something you've already done and are doing and will continue to do. Your point about additional funding from Welsh Government and potentially the UK government, I think we all know that the pandemic has hit public funding extremely hard. We are likely to be going through another period of less resources being available to public bodies. So the prospect of more money being thrown at this agenda is quite unlikely. It may happen, but I suspect it won't. But what will be happening is that there will be an expectation that you use the resources you do have to make the best use of them, and things like collaboration and finding efficient ways of delivering services collectively is well on the agenda. I take your point that you do already collaborate a lot and you already do lots of good things. Absolutely, and that's hopefully captured in the report. Then your final one on the WASP fleet, well, if you work out based on the information that we collated, the average cost per vehicle, I think WASP is 5 times the fire service. So there's obviously an issue in terms of maintenance contracts, which that data has been presented back to the maintenance managers in that particular service. And I know it's something that's been taken forward by the collaboration fleet. They would argue possibly that they have very high technical specific fleet. I would argue that's no different to fire service, where you've got exactly the same demands on your fleet, which are very technical, high spec vehicles. So I think there is an issue in how they contract and the contracts they have in place, and that's certainly something that's been explored to the Strategic Collaboration Board. So hopefully, I think that covered all your questions.
Oh, and thanks for your response, Nick, because like I said, we're not worried about collaborating, but it's just the initial risk of working with the NHS. I agree with what you said earlier about a sticking plaster, and we're not getting any more funding for our staff, and yet we're asking them more. That's my biggest,
Yeah. You could go to the maintenance on the ambulances, and you could see how much of that is down to damage as opposed to vehicle faults, because they could save money by paying to do driving courses with either us or the police. There's different ways of all these people saving money other than just trying to do each other's jobs, because you don't get a plumber to wire your house. You might get him to be the labourer for the sparky, but you want a sparky to wire your house.
I'm lucky because I'm a fitter by trade, but I've worked on the fire, police, an ambulance, an army. So I understand what's what, but I was alarmed to see those figures from the Welsh ambulance regarding, the fire service got specialist equipment, but it alarms me to see they're pumping money in And for figures like that, it's deeply alarming for me, you know. But there you are, that
Yep.
is what it is. But
It's certainly something that our colleagues, I should say, not my colleagues, our colleagues in the team that deals with the Welsh Ambulance Service will be certainly looking into when they do their audit of accounts work, and certainly on fleet, it's something they're touching on. But the one thing I would say is bear in mind, collectively as emergency services, you spend over £1 billion in Wales annually. So it's important that they make best use of the funding they've got, but we are talking about quite a small amount of resource, and no doubt they should be looking to make best use of that. But, collectively, you do spend a huge amount of money to keep us safe.
yeah, the point I was trying to raise, we're trying to be efficient, with money, and so that looking at them figures, that don't look efficient to me, personally.
Yeah. No, I'm not disagreeing with you, Chair.
Yeah.
I think it's a can opener. It starts the debate and allows them to dig down deeper and to learn, from examples like yourselves of what you're doing.
Okay, thanks for that, Nick. Anyway, answer all then. Any other questions? You've done well there, Nick, to be honest. Yeah, go on.
I do have one on the multi-agency incident transfer. We have got, I might be reading this wrong, Nick, we have got a joint control room with the police at the moment, but we've got independent control operators. I read that as a tri-service call centre, and whoever takes the call says that it goes to fire, police, ambulance. Is that correct?
Yeah, the system is very much based on filtering out information so every emergency services receives it pretty much in real time. So rather than a single call to one and another call to another, it allows you to manage the flow more effectively, and it's proved to be a very successful model. And I do know, again, that the Strategic Collaboration Board has included some further work on MATE to hopefully strengthen the approach and take that forward. So, I mean, in terms of how you respond to emergencies, our review didn't go into the detail on that, but we could see that there were some really good examples of how you use information to shape responses to get the most efficient outcome.
Yeah. I can see the value of them all working together, but I can also see the value of them only doing their own service, because your knowledge outside of your operating guidance of how many ambulances you'd send to whatever the incident was, how many police officers, the same with the fire operators, they got knowledge of the operating procedures which goes outside the books, and I don't see how you could do that over 3 services, that's all.
Okay, I take your point.
In actual fact, there's been some good questions. I hope Nick take these on board and take them forward for us.
Yeah.
But I mean,
absolutely,
he's answered everything. Yeah,
Yeah. And please don't think it's a criticism. It's a genuine question. I didn't understand how it would work that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always find coming to this committee a good experience, so thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Any other questions now for Nick before we make progress? Or
sure.
No? Well, thanks, Nick. Thanks for the report, and thanks for answering all our questions we put to you this morning. So thank you very much. So we need to note this report now, don't we? So
Yeah, just for note.
Yeah.
Is everybody happy to note that now?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody? Yeah, thank you. And then on to item 12, which is yours as well. We will have a big drink now after that.
And my colleagues will be delivering this on myself, Chair.
Yes, page 143.
Great, yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you, Chair. I'll just share the presentation.
Yeah. Ready when you are.
Okay. That come through?
Yep. Yeah.
Perfect. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. So I'm Charles. I work with Nick in the local government studies team, and also in the team that looks after the FRAs from a performance perspective. But I also have worked with Jen and Gillian on the account side of the audit of South Wales Fire this year as well. So the purpose of this presentation is something that all new members are getting across the local government sector. So you may be receiving a presentation like this in your own council, but this is from the perspective of South Wales Fire specifically. So this is just going to set out at quite a high level the work of the Auditor General and Audit Wales as a whole. The key pieces of legislation, the key reports, both financial and performance, and then to answer any questions that you've got. And just a further outline of that, I'll explain exactly who the Auditor General is and who Audit Wales are, because they are slightly different, and also the main powers and legislative pieces that form the framework of what we do. So I'll start off just with the Auditor General. He was appointed by the Queen on an 8-year term in July 2018. And he is held accountable by the Senate's Finance Committee and also presents to the Public Accounts and Public Administrations Committee. He is the statutory auditor for most of the Welsh public sector. That includes the Welsh Government, all of the councils, right down to the small town and community councils. And overall, he audits around £24 billion worth of taxpayers' money. To help him do that, he has people like myself and Nick, who work for Wales Audit Office, which together with the Auditor General brand ourselves as Audit Wales. There are different sets of powers for each. The Auditor General audits and reports. The Wales Audit Office provides that resource to the Auditor General. That is slightly complicated, but hopefully that made sense. And overall, we aim to provide assurance, to explain, and also to inspire through good practice exchange and in general with the reports that we provide. So the way that we're governed is that there's a statutory board of 9 members. They work with the Auditor General to advise him and also to monitor the work of the organisation. We ourselves are scrutinised by an independent firm, which is appointed by the Senedd. And we also have to get our funding approved by the Senedd each year. All of those reports, the accounts, the estimate, and any other scrutiny papers are available on our website. And we also consult on our fees each year, which is also on the website. So if I cover off the law now as well. So the Public Audit Wales Act 2004 is one of the key pieces, and it enables the Auditor General to undertake studies across Wales. And it also requires the Auditor General to be satisfied that local authorities, which includes fire and rescue authorities, have the proper arrangements to secure value for money. And that also enables him to make recommendations to improve value for money. Other laws include the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which requires the Auditor General to do local work, but also to do a across Wales report once every 5 years. So he did that most recently just before the election, the Senedd election last year, and that will be done again in 2025. And this is slightly different to councils. The local government measure from 2009 is still in place for fire and rescue authorities. So that requires improvement objectives to be set and then reporting done on how those objectives have been met. So just for context, the improvement objectives piece of work was provided to the authority this morning as being certificated and done. So that's one done this year, and just the performance report to come later in the year. The Auditor General is also required to publish a code of audit practice, which sets out the best professional practice in his view. And there are 4 principles that underpin that, being public focused, being independent, proportionate, and accountable. So I'm not going to go into that in any more detail because it's at quite a high level, but I will, before I hand over to Gillian to cover off the financial audit side of things, just to explain our organisation slightly more. So you'll be aware of the financial and the performance audit sides, but we also have teams that look at investigations where there's a particular issue that needs to be looked at in more detail. this often results in what's called a public interest report, which is a different kind of reporting that the Auditor General can do for very high sensitivity issues. And the investigations can also be triggered by correspondence that can be both by whistleblowers and by concerned members of the public. And as I flagged earlier, the Auditor General also has a good practice exchange team, which enables the organisation to highlight where things have gone well and how other public bodies can learn from each other. So hopefully Gillian will take over here.
Thank you, Charles. Helpful if I have my mic on, wouldn't it? Okay, so you've got two sets of auditors, as you've probably already noticed, external, which is ourselves, and internal, which is Steen. So external auditors then are we're your statutory auditors appointed by statute, and the scope of our work is determined by legislation, or some is at auditor's discretion for the proper arrangements, work and the well-being of Future Generations Act. So our work programme is developed by us based on the risks to the audit opinion or specific areas of study. And our work programme is presented back to yourselves in Finance Audit and Performance Management Committee. Internal audit has a slightly different remit, so it reports to the accounting officer, and your work programmes also come back to your audit and Finance Audit and Performance Management Committee, and they again are also risk-based. So although our roles are different, we do talk to each other and share knowledge as far as possible to avoid any duplication. Next slide, Charles. Next slide. Great, thanks. We do an annual audit plan, which is what I presented to you earlier at agenda item 7. So it's just a joint plan between our financial and performance audit work, usually presented annually. Just sets out, as I said earlier, the proposed work at the authority, the timetable, how much it will cost and who will undertake it. Then we also issue a quarterly regulatory work programme update to each authority, which just sets out the progress and how we've gone along against the audit plan. Next slide, please. Right. Local financial audit work, that's the audit of the financial statements, which is again what we've had a little bit earlier. So it just determines if the accounts are prepared in accordance with relevant accounting standards, and also looks at the annual governance statement to make sure that's in accordance with guidance and consistent with our knowledge. Next slide. Again, as I've said earlier, some of this materiality, we don't seek to get absolute assurance on the truth and fairness of financial statements, but adopt the concept of materiality so that we could, identify material misstatements are those that might result in the reader of the accounts being misled. We report those judgments back to you prior to the completion of the audit, which was in the ISA 260 report that you had earlier. Next slide. Again, that's just the audit financial statement report, also called the ISA 260 report, which just sets out our proposed opinion and summarises the corrected or uncorrected errors, which is what you had earlier in agenda item 7. Next slide. Do you want to go on to this, Charles?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gillian. So we carry out a programme to discharge the Auditor General's duties for both the value for money side of things and the well-being of future generations. So that can include a thematic study, anything that's flagged up on a risk assessment, and that's all then communicated to you in the annual plan, and that often involves talking to other inspectorates and the Minister's Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor. So just looking at the well-being of future generations in slightly more detail. As I said earlier, the Auditor General reported in May 2020, and the approach for the next 5 years that will be integrating this work in more detail into the work that we're already doing. And that's the approach we're going to take, and that will lead to both local reports, but also the big 5-year report before the next Senate election. Nick and me also, as I flagged at the start, work in local government studies. So these look at key challenges across the whole sector, So ones that will be reported in the autumn this year will be on poverty, social enterprises, and community resilience. But recently, other reports include looking at direct payments, town centre regeneration, and the emergency services collaboration piece that Nick just presented as well. So as well as all that, each authority gets an annual audit summary, which summarises the financial and performance work, and also can include work done by other regulators, and that is presented to yourselves. So before the election, Nick presented the local piece of work that was done for the previous financial year for South Wales Fire that looked at carbon emissions reduction. And a balanced report looked at saying that the authority had the right infrastructure to become carbon neutral, but needs to address some risks to deliver what is an ambitious target, and that is an ambitious target across the whole public sector. So when we produce the reports, your role as a committee is in assuring yourselves that the arrangements are in place to make progress against the recommendations. And that is mainly done through holding officers to account to ensure things are implemented. And some reports may also be of interest to wider members of the authority, the full authority as well. Outside of South Wales Fire, we also do conduct some wider performance work. The National Studies team looks at Welsh Government, but also wider public sector issues. The big one of those is the Picture of Public Services, which looks at key trends in finance and some of the headline issues in future service delivery. As well as that, as I flagged earlier as well, we do good practice exchange outputs, which includes case studies and webinars, which is a free-flowing discussion generally where it allows people to exchange their knowledge and experience. So the final couple of slides from me. These are the key members of staff for South Wales Fire. As Gillian mentioned earlier, the contact details for these people are in the audit plan. So feel free to get in contact if there's anything in particular. Our website is also there, and also the link to where all of our reports are published. So that's it for the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions, or Nick or Gillian, depending on the nature of it, and possibly how nice they are, depends. But I'll stop sharing there.
Okay, thanks for that. Has anybody got any questions like to ask? The only thing I would ask is, I don't know why this is coming to my brain. If we wanted to challenge your decision, even though it's gone through the officers, how would we approach that with your organisation?
Well, the agreement we have when we produce our performance audit reports, that's again set out in the Code of Audit Practices, that we have to check for factual accuracy and balance in how we present information. So the way we do that with each organisation we audit is that we do it through the officers. There will be occasions when we will say things that you will probably not like, but if it's based on the facts and it's demonstrated that it's been presented in a fair and consistent way, then that's something we just have to live with. With regards to how we approach that with yourselves as a committee, we're always happy to present our findings to you and to be challenged on what we've written and to explain why we've written what we've written. But in terms of checking the contents of reports, the agreement is that we do that with the professional officers who are appointed to do that very thing.
Yeah. It wasn't a trick question. It was just sort of, how would we do
I
it?
don't know.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that. Councillor Nawari, you wanted to ask one? We did try, but you went, so.
Yeah, I did, yeah. Yeah, I just wondered, is there any proactive element to the work you do? Or is it just mostly watching and, reporting to us? Do you, would you say, have you thought of doing something differently or anything like that? Is there any proactive element in your work?
We can only do what we have the legal basis to do, so that the work itself has to hit the areas that Charles outlined, the various pieces of legislation, which stipulates what we can and can't do. We do try to do topics when we undertake our reviews, which are in the moment, things that are important your organisation and others. So hopefully that's the best way of us picking up, you know, the big issue, big ticket items at any one time. But unfortunately, we can only do certain things. We can't do horizon scanning reviews because that's not really within our gift.
Okay, so I mean earlier when we were discussing collaborative working and all that, you wouldn't have had any role in saying that that is a good way to go down, you know, collaborating.
Well, that's set out in the expectations that the Welsh Government have placed. So they want to see greater collaboration. We don't audit policy as directly. We don't say the policy is right or wrong. We look at the implementation of the policy. So our review is very much looking at how far is collaboration going, rather than is collaboration the right thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, Councillor Norman, just to add to that, Nick, is perhaps just to say that, you know, the bi-monthly meetings that myself and you have between us, that, you know, some of that proactivity perhaps will come up in discussions then. So if there's certain themes or observations from some of the other audit work that you're doing across the rest of the public sector, they will be raised in discussion with myself and for me to feed back to the rest of the organisation and members at that point.
Absolutely, and then Karen's quite right. The other thing which Charles touched on that we provide is, and Julian, is a quarterly update on the progress in our work, and included within that update will be a link to a range of outputs that we produced in that period, plus the work of our good practice exchange. So that's the formal part of how we present information back to you. But Karen's quite right. When myself and Charles meet with Karen, we do go over the agenda, look at what's on the horizon. Karen gives us some really helpful information about work within South Wales Fire, the sort of issues you're currently dealing with. And we're also tied into some of the national work programmes that are being run by Welsh Government, particularly with the Chief Fire Advisor.
Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Well, thank you for your reports anyway. And we've challenged you, even though you are Audit Wales. That's what I like.
Can we just ask Nick and Charles if you can share those slides with us and we can circulate them to all the members of the Fire Authority then?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Right, thank you. Thanks for that anyway. Is members happy to note that them reports from Audit Wales?
Yeah.
And thank you for your contributions and answering the questions for us. On to item 13, which is a forward work programme, page 145.
It's just the standard work programme for the rest of the, obviously today's committee and the rest of the year. Obviously today's agenda items have been predominantly backward looking at the things that have happened for the last financial year and sort of retrospective recommendations coming out of that. The remainder of the year is obviously a bit more forward looking. You'll have things like the medium-term financial strategy and budget setting reports coming through to the next committee, and then obviously the ongoing revenue capital monitoring reports throughout the year. So no proposed changes to the plan as it is at the moment, unless members have got observations and want to add or change anything.
Members happy with that? The report? That's great. On to item 14, the report of business that I got, no, on page 1.3, I feel nothing, so there we are. That's the end of the meeting, and thank you everybody for their contributions this morning. Did you want to bring anything up?
I was just going to say, you said an AOB bit, because I missed a bit on agenda item 9. Sorry, on the performance monitoring report.
Right, did you want to say that? Yeah.
No, with advertising for an ACO's post, whose post is it filling? Because it was the deputy chief officer finished, and they normally fill the top post, and then whoever comes in under it, they fill the ones under. I just didn't know if we were making a new ACO post or.
Yeah, before I respond, I'll have to declare an interest in it, because obviously it's the post I'm currently doing temporary.
Yeah.
But it is, the post that's been advertised is an ACO for corporate services, so it's the Director of Corporate Services role.
So who was doing that?
It was Sally's role, but she had the deputy role as a sort of bolt-on function. So
right, that's what I didn't realise it was a
deputy
bolt-on
chief
officer.
was a function in addition to the director of corporate services role.
So will we be advertising the DEP role as well?
in the future, that
Yeah.
will be advertised, yes.
Thank you. No, I wasn't sure, that's all.
Yeah, we have been told there's an appointments committee, the chair of the fire authority, deputy chair, the chair of these committees will be sitting on the panel, so
Yeah,
it is in the process, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
and the only reason I didn't ask you, I had the page number written down, but because where I jumped the gun on the first 2 points, I thought I was going to wait till you got to it.
Yeah, we haven't got it, you'll be on the bottom, so. Is there anything else before we want to finish? Anybody want to read anything?
Thank you.
No? Well, thank you, everybody, again.
Thank you.
We'll see you the next meeting.